What is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of the Apostle Peter? For most people, they would respond with, he's the disciple who denied Jesus 3 times on the night that Jesus was arrested. And of course, that's correct. But you know, there's a lot of other things that Peter did that you would think that people would associate him with. For example, in Matthew 14, we're told that Peter walked on water to go to Jesus. And he preached the first sermon of the church in Acts chapter 2. He was part of the inner circle of 3 disciples from the 12, and that was Peter, James, and his brother John. And they had special privileges. For example, Jesus would take those 3 on the Mount of Transfiguration. He took those 3 in when he raised Jairus' daughter from the dead. He, in the Garden of Gethsemane, took those 3 a little bit further to where he ended up praying there in the garden. So they had special privileges. They were closer to Jesus. But it's interesting, we often are remembered for the bad things that we do. And of course, Peter is no exception to that. In this video, we're going to look at a passage in John chapter 21, verses 15 to 19. Even though it certainly is true that Peter denied Jesus, this wonderful passage of Scripture is where Jesus gives Peter not only the opportunity to express that he knows Jesus, but to confirm his love for Jesus. In John chapter 21 and verse 14, it says, "This is now the 3rd time Jesus showed himself to his disciples after he was raised from the dead." So this kind of sets the stage for us. This is the 3rd time, as it says, after Jesus was risen, that he appeared to the disciples. And in verses 1 to 13, I'm not going to look at it in this video, but Peter, with 6 other disciples, decided to go fishing while they were waiting for Jesus. And Peter says, I'm going to go fishing, and these other 6 disciples said, well, we're going to go with you. And they went fishing, and they didn't catch anything all night. There's a lot of things that are very symbolic in that passage as well, in the first 13 verses of this passage. So the disciples were fishing all night. They didn't catch anything. And they end up, Jesus appears on the shore. They don't realize it's Jesus at first, but he asks if they caught anything, and they said no. And so Jesus ends up making breakfast for them. And you might say, well, where did he get the fish? Well, I don't know. The passage doesn't tell us, but I'm guessing since he had created fishes and loaves on a couple of occasions, at least that we know of, I imagine he probably created those fish as well. But we don't know for sure. But Jesus is making breakfast for them after a night of fishing, and they didn't catch anything. So in verse 15, it says, "So when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, 'Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these?' He said to him, 'Yes, Lord, you know that I love you.' He said to him, 'Feed my sheep.'" Now, when Jesus said, "Do you love me more than these?" First of all, Jesus uses a word that's a form of agape, which is God love. That's where you give and ask nothing in return. But when he says, "Do you love me more than these?" A couple different thoughts on that. Some suggest that he's talking about more than the other disciples, but I've always leaned towards he's saying, "Do you love me more than these?" as in these fish. This is all you know is fishing. And do you love me more than this, Peter? Because remember, he had left his fishing profession, his boats and nets and everything to go follow Jesus initially. So I think that's what he's talking about. But he uses the word agape, or a form of it. And that is God love, to give and ask nothing in return. And Peter's response, when he says, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you," Peter's actually using a lesser form of the word love, and that's phileo. We think of Philadelphia. Phileo is love, and Delphos is brother, so the city of brotherly love. But Peter, responding to Jesus' statement with a form of agape, "Do you love me more than these?" And he says, "Lord, I do. I phileo you," okay? And that's a love like a friend. And then Jesus says to him, "Feed my lambs." If you really love me, feed my lambs. Then in verse 16, he said to him again a second time. Now we don't know how much time went in between these. It would appear from the passage there wasn't a whole lot of time in between. In fact, I would even say almost immediately. But he said to him again a second time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? He said to him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, Tend my sheep. We see the same two Greek words for love, Jesus using a form of agape, and Peter's response with phileo, which again is a love like you would have for a friend. But we alter a little bit here what Jesus says for Peter to do, tend my sheep. He goes from feed my lambs in verse 15 to tend my sheep here in verse 16. And literally that word is to tend as a shepherd. And you could translate it, Peter, if you do love me, take care of my sheep. Verse 17, he said to him the third time. And again, the passage would seem to indicate this is just one right after another. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? I think you might be seeing a pattern here if you haven't already pieced this together or heard a message from somebody that said, Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And here, Jesus is getting him to confirm 3 times that you love me. And so the third time he says, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Now this is interesting, a shift in language. Here we see Jesus using phileo. After using a form of agape in the first 2 times that he asked Peter, do you love me? Do you love me? And each time Peter responded with, I love you like a friend, phileo. So here in this verse, verse 17, Jesus actually uses the same term, the same form of love that Peter has used in his first 2 responses. So each time Peter used the word phileo, that is friend, and Jesus uses that same word here in verse 17, asking him the third time, Peter, do you love me? Then take care of my flock. Or literally, he says, feed my sheep. Verse 18, Jesus says, most assuredly, I say to you, when you were younger, you girded yourself and walked where you wished. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish. Of course, that word gird means to clothe. He says in verse 19, this he spoke, signifying by what death he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, follow me. This is amazing. When the Lord called me to follow him, and specifically to be a pastor, he didn't say, all right, here's how you're going to die. And then after describing how you're going to die, now come follow me. This is quite a unique situation. And of course, we know that not only Peter, but the other disciples, with the exception of John, and there's some debate about him, we know he was exiled to Patmos, and that's where he wrote the book of Revelation. But the other disciples were all martyred, every single one of them, in horrific ways. And tradition records, the Bible doesn't specifically say other than this passage, but tradition records that Peter was crucified, which certainly this description, this would fit with crucifixion. But tradition says, and I'm sure you've probably heard this, that he was on the way to be crucified and he was older. And he said, I'm not worthy to die like my Lord. And so they crucified him upside down. That is, they turned his cross upside down. Now, the Bible doesn't say that, but tradition says that. And it's pretty much commonly agreed upon by most Bible scholars that that's what happened. The thing is, if that is the case, turning him upside down only would have caused him to die faster. Because when you understand crucifixion, they had to push themselves up, which would have been very painful if, like Jesus, they had nails through their feet. And in order to breathe, they had to do that. And then they would collapse. And then when they wanted to breathe, they would lift themselves up. So it would have been very painful. The Romans crucified tens of thousands of people. And not all of them even were nailed. Some of them were just tied to crosses. And of course, they were left to die, and they would have died, some of them for days as Different birds and animals would come, and it's pretty gruesome when you study it. But again, tradition says that Peter was crucified upside down, and certainly the description that we're given here does fit with crucifixion. And then Jesus tells Peter, when you're old. Most Bible scholars say that Peter was put to death about 34 years after this description. And his precise age at that time is not known. But again, it's interesting that Peter, who had denied Jesus, and remember on the night Jesus was crucified, Peter said, Lord, I'm willing to die for you. I'm ready to go to jail with you and even die if necessary. And that's when Jesus said, Peter, before the rooster crows in the morning, you will deny that you even know me 3 times. And of course, Peter was adamant, Lord, no matter what, there's no way I'm going to deny you. And of course, he did. But it's amazing that even though Peter denied Jesus 3 times, on this occasion, the Lord gave him opportunity to confess 3 times that he not only knew him, but indeed that he loved him. And Jesus said, Peter, take care of my sheep, shepherd my sheep. Well, we do serve a wonderful God, a God of second chances and even third and fourth and fifth chances. And, if you're like me, God has been so good over the years as I've failed him many, many times. And yet he's a loving, caring God, and he always gives us opportunity to have a second chance. Well, thank you for visiting The Essential Truth. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, share this video with someone that would be encouraged by it. All those things are very helpful to the channel, and it lets me know that you appreciate this content and you would like more of it. So thank you for visiting The Essential Truth. This is Pastor Dave. You have a blessed day.